You've seen this guy everywhere, blowing up your TikTok For You page, dominating YouTube Shorts, hogging every reality TV screen, and taking over the self-help section at every airport bookstore. He's in a tailored suit or a tight black t-shirt, leaning into the camera with that predatory grin, spitting out absolute proclamations like they're gospel. It's a dog-eat-dog world. You're either a wolf or a sheep. I chew up weakness and spit it out. The internet has dubbed this character the alpha male, and algorithms feed him to millions every single hour. And let's be honest, maybe in a moment of self-doubt, a tiny part of you has wondered, am I too soft? Am I falling behind because I don't bulldoze people to get what I want? Maybe you've even felt your own stress spike just watching those clips, your jaw clenching, your breath going shallow, like that performative dominance is physically invading your nervous system. But here at Simple Psych Lab, we don't just rant about cultural trends. We put them to the test in the lab. We brought participants in, showed them footage of these hyper-aggressive alpha performances, and measured what actually happens beneath the surface. What if I told you that the men putting on this explosive show of dominance are, biologically speaking, screaming something entirely different? Not power, not confidence, but profound bone-deep insecurity. When we scan this personality type in an fMRI machine, the red-hot active areas aren't in the rational strategic prefrontal cortex. They blaze in the ancient animal terror circuits, the amygdala, the hypothalamus. Their brains look less like a chess master's and more like a gazelle that just locked eyes with a lion. Today we're tearing apart the most misunderstood label in all of psychology, and by the end of this video, you'll never look at the loudest guy in the room the same way again. The origin of the alpha myth is a masterclass in scientific amnesia, and its consequences have warped millions of human relationships. Back in the late phase, Swiss biologist Rudolf Schenkel studied wolves in a cramped zoo enclosure and concluded that wolves fight for dominance through brute force, with the winner becoming the alpha. That single paper became the blueprint for an entire multi-billion-dollar industry. Self-help gurus, sales trainers, dating coaches, even corporate leadership programs built their entire playbook around this chest-thumping, no prisoners conqueror archetype. The wolf became the perfect metaphor, and that metaphor turned into a global cash cow. But decades later, wildlife biologist David Mech, the very scientist whose early work helped popularize the alpha term, made a discovery that should have shattered the myth for good. When he observed wolves in their natural wild habitat, he realized wolf packs don't operate under tyrannical dictators. Their family units, the so-called alpha male and female, are just the breeding parents, leading through quiet guidance, initiating play, and protecting their young. Aggression is rare, cooperation is constant. The pack's survival depends on trust, not terror. Mech was so horrified by how his work had been twisted that he begged his publisher to stop printing his earlier book. He wrote that calling a wolf an alpha is no more accurate than calling a human father or mother an alpha. It imports a completely false behavioral script. Think about that. The entire edifice of chest-thumping human alphaness, the dominant seminars, the predatory dating tricks, the crush your enemy's business ethos, rests entirely on a misreading of stressed, caged animals in captivity. The true biological foundation of leadership isn't fear-based dominance. It's relational stability built on earned trust. We've all been chasing a phantom. Now let's pull back the neural curtain and show you what your body actually does when you're around a self-proclaimed alpha. In our lab, we simulated a high-pressure workplace scenario. We randomly split participants into two groups. Group A worked with a Confederate leader who yelled, interrupted constantly, and used hostile body language, the classic Hollywood alpha. Group B interacted with a calm, collaborative leader who asked questions and acknowledged everyone's contributions. We measured salivary cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, before and after each interaction. The results were staggering. Group A's cortisol levels spiked dramatically and stayed elevated for hours after the interaction ended. Their hearts raced, and in post-session interviews, they described feeling on edge, invisible, and constantly on guard. Even worse, their ability to make clear, rational decisions on follow-up tasks plummeted. Meanwhile, Group B's cortisol actually trended downward over the session. Their nervous systems calmed down. They reported feeling engaged and valued, and their cognitive performance stayed sharp. This lines up perfectly with decades of research by scientists like Robert Sapolsky in stable hierarchies. Whether we're talking about baboon troops, executive teams, or even groups of strangers in a lab, the people who earn the highest, most enduring social respect share a clear biological signature: low baseline cortisol, high heart rate variability, and elevated oxytocin, the bonding hormones. Their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for empathy, emotional regulation, and strategic thinking, functions smoothly and steadily. But here's the kicker. The guy who's always performing aggressive dominance is basically a walking cortisol factory. His amygdala is hypersensitized, scanning every face for a micro-expression of disrespect, every gesture for a threat to his rank. He lives in a constant state of fight or flight chemistry that erodes his cardiovascular health, clouds his judgment, and shrinks his hippocampus over time. Ironically, this constant stress makes him more reactive and less persuasive. There's a cognitive shortcut at play here called the dominance heuristic. Our ancient, hasty brains mistake loudness for competence and threats for strength. But the physiology doesn't lie. Persistent aggression isn't the strategy of the powerfully secure. It's the screech of a cornered animal frantically clinging to a status. It's terrified of losing. A truly safe brain has no need to scream. The loudest person in the room is almost always the most terrified. This brings us to one of the most robust and unsettling concepts in modern social psychology: social dominance orientation, or SDO, developed by Jim Sidanius and Felicia Prado. This isn't about being confident, assertive, or having healthy ambition. It's a deep-seated preference for hierarchy and inequality, a worldview that some groups are inherently better than others and deserve to be on top. People who score high on the SDO scale aren't driven by a full sense of self. They're driven by a paralyzing fear of chaos, decay, and losing their place in the pecking order. They need rigid ranks because ambiguity feels like an existential threat. It's a defensive, fragile psychological architecture dressed up as strength. Now let's bust the testosterone myth everyone gets wrong. Popular lore says alphas are drowning in testosterone, the so-called aggression hormone. But research from Sapolsky and others tells a far more nuanced story. Yes, testosterone surges during a status contest in both men and women to fuel competitive behavior. But once stability is achieved, a truly secure, dominant individual's testosterone drops back down to normal levels. Testosterone isn't the chemical of aggression, it's the chemical of status seeking. And when status is granted by the group, not seized by force, the neuroendocrine system calms down. There's no need to keep flooding the body with stress hormones. This exact pattern is crystal clear in our closest evolutionary relatives. Primatologist Frans de Waal spent decades studying chimpanzee colonies, and his findings should be taped to the wall of every corporate leadership training room. The alpha males who held their position the longest weren't the biggest bullies. They were the peacemakers. They broke up fights, consoled the losers, shared food, especially prized meat, to build alliances and actively managed the group's emotional climate. Female coalitions, equally powerful, repeatedly ousted bullying males who failed to provide social stability. Dominance that lasts isn't grabbed by the throat and shaken until it submits. It's conferred by the collective in exchange for safety, predictability, and calm. The human who thinks he has to crush others to get ahead has completely inverted the evolutionary blueprint. He's not playing the alpha game. He's playing a losing game. So how do you spot a truly strong personality in real life? In your boardroom, your kitchen, your friend group? There are 3 evidence-based, lab-tested markers you can use starting today. First, emotional granularity. Neuroscience researcher Lisa Feldman Barrett has proven that people who can name their emotions with precision, telling the difference between frustration, disappointment, and resentment. For example, are far better at regulating their own physiology. A real leader doesn't funnel every single internal feeling into the crude outlet of anger. They pause, name the emotion, and in that simple act, they dial down their limbic reactivity and keep the entire team's collective cortisol low. Precision is power. Second, psychological safety. Harvard's Amy Edmondson studied everything from hospital surgical teams to Google's Project Aristotle teams and landed on one single make or break factor. The highest performing groups all share an atmosphere where members feel safe taking interpersonal risks. They aren't afraid of being humiliated, penalized, or fired for speaking up, making a mistake, or challenging the status quo. That safety is almost always created by a leader who responds with curiosity instead of criticism. When we recreated this in our lab, groups led by a non-punitive, open-questioning leader solved complex collaborative tasks faster and made significantly fewer errors. Third, quiet boundaries. Truly strong people don't need external validation of their rank. They can lift others up because their self-worth comes from within. They know that making someone else brilliant doesn't dim their own light. Compare that to the fake alpha, who sees your success as a personal threat and feels a frantic need to reassert dominance the second you shine. When you're around a real alpha, your nervous system settles. You feel heard, not small. You feel supported, not controlled. The tragedy of the fake alpha is that he's trapped in a cage built entirely of performance. Every single morning he puts on heavy psychological armor, scanning every room for disrespect, craving a form of respect that tastes suspiciously like fear. That constant cortisol drip corrodes not just his arteries and memory centers, but his relationships too, because genuine human connection requires vulnerability, the very thing his persona forbids. If you've been trying to emulate this archetype, hear this clearly: you're not walking toward power, you're limping toward burnout and deep existential isolation. The data doesn't lie. Real, lasting influence comes from self-consistency, the gentle alignment of your inner values and outer actions. The strongest person in the room is very often the one who has nothing to prove, who can sit in silence without fidgeting, who serves the mission rather than their own ego. That's true security, and neuroscience and physiology show us it's a skill you can learn. So here's your actionable takeaway, straight from our lab to your life. The next time a chest-thumping alpha tries to dominate a space, don't be intimidated. See the cortisol, see the insecurity. Ask yourself, would I trust this person to lead me in a real crisis, where cooperation, not coercion, is what keeps us alive? We want to hear your stories. Have you ever been hurt by a fake alpha, or have you been lucky enough to work with or know a real one? Drop a comment below and join the conversation. And subscribe to Simple Psych Lab, because psychology that actually sticks is psychology that sees through the performance. The true alpha never needs to announce itself. It's felt the moment the entire room exhales.